Okay. Whenever you're ready.
So hi everybody, including the person who's just walking out. So I'm Brendan O'Connor. I'm doing all this crap a bunch later, but I'm actually going to talk about a more interesting project right now. At ShmooCon 2013, were any of you guys there? One of you? It's one of you. There was a panel which some of you might have heard about because it caused a lot of kerfluffle, because among other things, Mudge got shouted down from the stage, talking about what a terrible person he was. There's a talk on cooperation between academia and kind of non-academic hackers, right, as also known as the rest of the universe. And there was lots of things going back of, you're too, you're not rigorous enough, and you're too far in an ivory tower, and lots of hating. What it actually boiled down to, though, is kind of a simpler problem that doesn't need to have as much hating, which is this. Academics find the rest of the hackers annoying because we don't cite our prior work. And hackers find academics annoying because they think they only cite prior work and they never do anything. That's kind of the minimum viable core idea. But I was talking with some friends afterwards, and we're like, well, why don't hackers cite anything? And it's because it turns out a lot of times it's really hard. It's very hard to cite to about 35 minutes into Dan Kaminsky's third of 17 Black Ops of TCP/IP things. He talks about this one thing that's kind of cool, right? It's very hard to cite to a couple tweets that were written 6 months ago and that even the original author can't find because you can only get the most recent 3,000 tweets and he tweets too much, right? We have a problem with link rot that is actually losing hacker work, and this causes a really disastrous outcome. Namely, we then have to keep redoing the stuff, right? We spend a huge amount of our time, say a third to half of the time we spend on new research projects, doing stuff that somebody else did before, we just can't find it. Either they didn't publish the code, or there's just not enough of an explanation of how to use it, or sometimes just we've never heard of that. And this happens in everybody's presentation. I'm sure everybody's gotten a week out and then going, holy crap, somebody solved the first 2 months, now 10 months ago, of all the work I did. So we're creating a project, and it's going to be an archive of sorts. Anybody familiar with the physics archive, the ARXIV, right? So it's a cool resource. It allows people to publish papers kind of as preprints is the idea, because physics is such an academic discipline. We're going to do something much bigger than archive, but the same core idea exists. It's going to be an archive of hacker work. And hacker very broadly defined, whether you're a security researcher, whether you're somebody who figured out that they could hotwire an Arduino and cause a small bomb to go off, whatever it takes. Although I think the government, when I talk to you about that, we're going to allow you to present your work. And it's going to be a very broad-based approach. If you have just a few tweets worth of stuff, you can say, hey, I'm going to do some work on this starting with these couple tweets. And we're going to index the tweets and we're going to save them. And that way they don't rot away. And then if in a couple months you go, hey, I've written up this blog post and I posted it over here. We'll take the blog post in, we'll save the metadata, we'll take the content if you actually wrote the content, and we'll save it in the database. And we're going to assign a unique identifier. In academic worlds, there's a really cool unique identifier system called the DOI, which is that long string of numbers you see at the top of every academic paper. It provides a unique identifier. And that's awesome, except that unlike, say, a website, if you assign 2 DOIs to one paper, you're penalized $50 by the registrars. Not to mention the $10,000 or $20,000 a year it costs to become what they call a registrant, which is the equivalent of kind of being a web registrar. The terms are a little bit off. So this is clearly nuts, right? Especially because we want to be able to have one continuous thing, and we don't want to be incompatible with academic publishing. So we're going to assign our own DOI link system. There's some cool ways to work on that Sergey Bradas at Dartmouth has been working on for a couple of years. But then we're going to go beyond that. Because part of the thing is, people get embarrassed to publish their work, especially if it's only half form, especially if it's only a couple blog posts, right? They don't want to publish their code. We want to encourage people to go to that next step. So not only are we going to index everything, we're also going to have a mentorship program. And this is an idea we've stolen blatantly from academia. There's the idea of peer review. You submit your paper, and a whole bunch of people who hate you and make their grad students do it, read your paper, and then send off kind of half-formed comments. So we're going to take the good parts of that, the idea of anonymous peer review, and throw away the pressure and the publisher perish crap. So instead we're going to have, you can submit your stuff, and you can just say, I'd actually like comments, I'd like help developing this into a more fully formed idea. Whether that's just, you should read these other papers because somebody's already done some work like this. Either whether that's on the archive or whether that's somewhere else. Then you can also go, hey, I don't really know how to write an academic paper, right? If I even want to, right? I don't know where I'd submit it if I had one. I don't know what one looks like because I'm not an academic. We're going to help you through all of this. We're going to let not just academics serve as mentors, but the whole community. Senior researchers in any field can come to the archive and contribute. Okay? And then finally, we're going to serve as a repository. In addition to our unique identifier system, we're going to have people that people can point back and say, so yeah, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, this work was already being done, so go back and look at that. And then whether that ends up being finally posted on HARK, whether that's the final repository for the paper, or it's published with the ACM or the IEEE or Usenix or the boot talks at Usenix, we're going to have a way to point outward as well. So, whereas the DOI systems don't like it if anybody else indexes it, we're going to allow every system in the world to index this content and hopefully point out to every iteration. So you can track an idea as it moved from a couple tweets one day to an irate IRC conversation to 3 angry blog posts to an academic paper to a black hat talk. And you'll be able to track the whole course and see what changed along the way. And you as the author will be able to control what you're showing and control how your work is presented to the whole world. So we're calling this project HARK, the Hacker Archive. Now, those of you who've tried to set up any kind of archive and work with provenance issues and all that know that it's kind of a pain in the butt. Not only are there, like how do we do provenance? How do we do all this tracking? Especially because a lot of this hasn't been done before at scale. But it's also, how do we set up a corporation so that it can continue and so that people can make donations? So, towards this end, I've launched a Kickstarter starting yesterday. And so this is where you all come in. Not only do we want you to submit your work, whether that's B-Sides work, DEF CON work, or whatever, we also are hoping that we can get some support. And the reason that we need support is very simple. There's legal fees in setting up a 501c3. Those of you who've ever done that know it's kind of a lot of legal fees. There's hosting fees, and there's the horde of coders we're going to employ for a few months to get a lot of this stuff online, especially as we take Dartmouth's notes on how to create an infinitely extensible DOI-like system and turn it into something we can actually run queries against. So this is HARK. The idea is that we're going to stop failing the old bad ways and start failing new and better and more exciting ways. Okay? The project is linked from a Kickstarter at thehark.net and thehark.org. And I have little mini MOOC cards up here with all of our various mottos about how we're going to start failing in new and exciting ways so that we can stop failing the same old boring ways. Questions? Anything? Really that boring?
Yeah.
So,
how are you going to encourage things that, like let's say that you put a talk together, like you were referencing, block object TCP/IP. How are you going to encourage someone to actually go from, okay, well I put a slide deck together with a couple interesting ideas, to actually taking that step to writing a more formal paper, or are you just going to say, oh, we'll send us your slide deck and we'll call that good? Or are you going to petition DEF CON or Black Hat to release the videos, or how would that work?
So we're going to do all of the above. We're going to point to the DEF CON stuff because when it's hosted somewhere that we can rely on, we're going to do that. We're also going to, for things we can't reasonably rely on, we're going to interface with the Internet Archive, who have an API, kind of a private API of submit this and we'll lock it so that you know that you can always link to it in the future.
Right.
In terms of how to encourage people, well, we think that some people really actually want to do this, just have no idea how. So we're going to work with conference organizers to give them, hey, if you're interested in doing a little bit more of this, throw it at HARK. But we're also going to say, if you just throw a slide deck up, that's good. Because then we've got your slides, then we've got your presenter notes. And I've had talks where, from big, famous, awesome researchers who 18 months after a conference, I could no longer find their slides even. So at least those would start to, stop the bleeding, in essence, of all of the work we've done before. So we'll pursue all paths in parallel is kind of the answer to your question.
How far along are you in the nonprofit process and consider being under the umbrella of someone else's EIN?
We are waiting for the Kickstarter to complete to know if there's actually enough interest. That's essentially the idea. And then we're going to move forward into the nonprofit. If you worked with it before, you don't go straight to 501c3. You start at 501 and then go for C3 status. This is an impossible thing. I'm just finished my second year in law school, so I have lawyer friends who are willing to do this work. They also need to eat, so we also need to pay them. But it's not an impossible process, and we'll have real lawyers doing real work on it. Anybody else? Cool, thank you. I've got cards if anybody wants them.